They laughed at me, Emily whispered under her breath, clutching the worn notebook that contained every step of her plan. They laughed when I said I would rise. New York streets glistened after a brief rain, neon reflections flickering on wet asphalt. Taxis honking in the background, the city alive with indifference. Yet for Emily Taylor, nothing outside mattered. What mattered were the faces of those who had dismissed her. Smirks, the whispered mockery, the raised eyebrows whenever she tried to speak. Fresh from a small town, with nothing but determination and a suitcase heavier with dreams than clothes, she had been laughed at by colleagues, investors, and mentors alike. A girl from nowhere, one executive had scoffed, wants to play in the big leagues. The memory made Emily's lips tighten. That first boardroom meeting felt like a storm. Sharp suits, sharper glances, questions meant to trap her, decisions dismissed before she could explain. She had felt small, almost invisible, but something inside refused to yield. That flicker of defiance, at first timid, had grown into something unstoppable. Strategy, patience, and foresight that no one could predict. Emily adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the weight of every insult, every underestimation letting it fuel her resolve. She began at zero, literally zero. No investors, no powerful contacts, no safety net, just a tiny rented office and a mind determined to read every trend. Every weakness, every opportunity the so-called experts ignored. Each small win was invisible at first, unnoticed by anyone who underestimated her. Every success quietly chipped away at their arrogance, while she moved silently, observing, calculating, preparing. Outside, a taxi honked impatiently, snapping her from memory. She glanced at her reflection in a shop window. The frightened girl who had arrived in the city months ago was gone. Now stood a woman with a mind sharp, a heart steady, and a purpose unwavering. The very people who had mocked her would one day recognize the force she had become, not by shouting, not with drama, but because she would make it impossible to ignore. The hum of the city, neon reflections on rain-slicked streets, and distant chatter seemed irrelevant compared to the quiet war she was waging within boardrooms and offices. Emily smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, and whispered again, "They laughed when I started from zero. But soon, they will understand who controls the game." And with that, she stepped past the skyscrapers that had once seemed impossibly tall. Each footfall deliberate, each breath a promise. The girl laughed at by everyone was no longer waiting for permission to rise. She was rising on her own terms. Every move, every observation, every patient calculation was part of a plan that no one could anticipate. Fate, it seemed, had been quietly watching her, preparing the stage for the woman who refused to remain invisible. Her first hint that something was shifting came on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily noticed the way colleagues listened to her more intently. Subtle nods, acknowledging her insight before the executives even spoke. Questions were asked that had never been asked before. Suggestions second-guessed. Decisions quietly challenged. Pride battled confusion in the faces of those who had once dismissed her. No one admitted that the quiet woman laughed at and underestimated might now be quietly orchestrating outcomes. Emily remained outwardly calm, every gesture deliberate, every word carefully measured. She attended meetings, corrected minor errors without drawing attention, contributed ideas so subtly they seemed like coincidence, all while others unknowingly took credit for her foresight. New York pulsed outside, indifferent to the silent war unfolding in glass and steel offices above, neon reflections glimmering on rain-slicked streets. One morning, a major project unexpectedly threatened to collapse due to mismanagement in a department. Everyone assumed they controlled completely. Panic flickered across supervisors' faces. But Emily had already identified the weak points and implemented precise adjustments days earlier. She guided solutions quietly, each step invisible yet decisive, leaving no trace of her hand. Colleagues began to rely on her instinctively, unaware that she had designed the safety net. By the time the senior executives noticed the smooth resolution, it was too late to claim credit. Every success she orchestrated chipped away at the authority of those who once mocked her, all while maintaining her silent guise. Whispers followed her in corridors, not suspicion, but admiration. Yet, she remained unnoticed in her true power, letting them fumble, underestimate, and misjudge her further. Later that evening, after another long day, one of the managers approached her in the quiet hallway, a forced smile hiding irritation. "How did you anticipate that problem?" "Nobody even knew it existed," he said, attempting casual tone, yet the tension in his voice betrayed unease. Emily's smile was subtle, measured, almost imperceptible. "Just paying attention," she replied softly. He frowned, puzzled, unable to pinpoint the source of her foresight. That night, Emily walked alone along New York streets, rain-slicked pavements, reflecting neon lights. Betrayal had become the catalyst for her transformation. Every calculated move, every patient observation, every minor victory contributed to a web of influence no one else could see. Those who had laughed at her dismissed her, doubted her intelligence, remained oblivious. Yet cracks in their confidence were widening. Fate had been watching, shaping her patience and resolve, ensuring that when the moment of reckoning came, it would strike with undeniable force. She was no longer the timid woman who started from zero. She was a silent storm, unstoppable, deliberate, and inevitable, prepared to reclaim everything they thought they controlled. The following week, Emily began making moves that no one could ignore. Small at first suggestions in meetings framed as casual observations, corrections offered as helpful notes. Insights dropped almost as if by accident, but each one carried weight. Projects began to flow more smoothly. Deadlines met with precision. Quietly, without fanfare, she built a network of allies who trusted her judgment. The same colleagues who had laughed at her months ago now sought her opinion, often before turning to the executives who had once dismissed her. It was subtle power, invisible yet undeniable, the kind that cannot be claimed by arrogance or entitlement. Emily walked through the corridors with the same calm demeanor, letting others take the spotlight while she orchestrated the outcome behind the scenes. One afternoon, a major client threatened to pull a contract because of an oversight in reporting. Panic spread across the office. Meetings were called, fingers pointed, and tempers flared. Emily had already anticipated the problem. She presented a discreet solution, offering it as a thought during a casual hallway conversation. Yet the impact was immediate. The client was reassured, the crisis averted, and those who had laughed at her stared in disbelief, realizing they had underestimated her entirely. Not one person connected the dots. She wanted it that way. Every move was calculated, every action part of a greater design. That evening, Emily reflected on her rise, sitting alone in her tiny apartment, overlooking the city. The lights of New York stretched endlessly, and she imagined each one as a person who had doubted her, mocked her, or dismissed her potential. She smiled softly, thinking of how quietly she had woven her influence, how she had turned every underestimation into fuel. Those who once held power over her were now unwittingly dependent on her insight. Every project she touched strengthened her position while maintaining the illusion of invisibility. Emily's phone buzzed with a message from a colleague she had quietly mentored, a simple thank you, a recognition of guidance that no one else could see. It was the first ripple of loyalty forming under the surface, the beginnings of a network that would solidify her influence permanently. She understood that patience and observation were as critical as action. The storm she carried within was no longer hidden. It was gathering force, silent but unstoppable, shaping the office dynamics in ways no one could anticipate. Walking home. Through the rain-slick streets, Emily allowed herself a brief sense of triumph. The woman who had started from nothing, who had been mocked and dismissed, was now invisible yet essential. Every step forward was a message she did not need to voice. Power is built in silence, influence in patience, and respect earned in quiet victories. She had learned that control did not require shouting or domination. It required strategy, foresight, and the refusal to be seen as small. The city hummed around her, oblivious to the quiet revolution she had sparked. Yet soon, very soon, the world would recognize the force she had become. By midweek, Emily's influence had grown undeniable. Colleagues who had once whispered behind her back now sought her guidance openly. Some hesitantly, some with newfound respect. none realizing how much control she had quietly accumulated. Every suggestion she made, every correction offered, subtly shifted the balance of power in her favor. She began to take bolder steps, highlighting flaws in procedures that had long gone unquestioned, proposing solutions that made senior staff look competent in front of clients while cementing her indispensable role. One morning, a team lead openly challenged a report she had prepared, scoffing at her calculations. Emily met his gaze calmly, her expression unreadable. "Have you considered the potential outcomes if we adjust these figures?" she asked, her tone soft yet firm. The room fell silent. He stammered, realizing she had anticipated every objection before he even voiced it. The senior executives exchanged glances, impressed by her foresight. Emily knew she had turned the moment into a subtle victory one. They could not question one that highlighted her competence without making her appear confrontational. Later that week, a critical client meeting threatened to spiral into chaos. Their dissatisfaction stemmed from repeated mistakes, errors that had been ignored until now. Emily had studied every report, every correspondence, predicting potential issues before they surfaced. During the meeting, she interjected at the right moment with a precise solution. A recommendation so elegant it resolved the client's concerns instantly. Applause broke out, not for her, but for the department head who delivered the presentation. Emily smiled internally. Another silent victory. Back at her desk, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Each day, each decision, each quiet intervention built toward a larger purpose. Those who had mocked her, underestimated her, and dismissed her intelligence were now dependent on her insight, unaware that she had engineered every safeguard. She sent a private note to a junior colleague she had mentored. A small word of encouragement, planting loyalty and trust that would bloom later. That evening, Emily walked through the city streets, rain dampening the sidewalks, neon reflections shimmering on puddles. The cold air cleared her mind. She thought of the laughter that had greeted her ambition months ago, of the smirks, the sneers, the disbelief. Every slight had fueled her strategy. Every insult sharpened her focus. Soon, the world would witness the full extent of what she had built. Fate had been patient, and so had she. Her storm was no longer subtle. It was gathering force, poised to strike in a way that would leave no doubt of her power. Emily had transformed from the girl who started with nothing into the woman who controlled. Outcomes, who orchestrated influence silently yet decisively. The city seemed unaware, indifferent, yet every step she took, every plan she executed, brought her closer to the inevitable reckoning. Those who had dismissed her would soon understand, underestimating someone who refuses to remain. Small comes at a cost they will not forget. The day had come when subtlety was no longer enough. Emily stepped into the boardroom, her presence calm but commanding. Every pair of eyes that had once doubted her now traced her movements, some with curiosity, some with unease. She carried a folder containing data, proposals, and solutions that no one else had anticipated. The executives who had once mocked her were present, faces tight with a mixture of surprise and caution. A junior colleague whispered, barely audible, "She's unstoppable." Emily smiled faintly, letting the comment pass without acknowledgement. She knew the moment required precision, not emotion. The first challenge arose when the head of operations questioned a long-standing decision, confident it would trip her up. "I reviewed every variable," Emily said smoothly, placing a hand on the folder, "and here's the alternative path that ensures success." She outlined the steps, clearly, logically, and decisively. As she spoke, she noticed the subtle shifts in posture, the realization dawning that she had not just predicted the problems, but had created the solutions before anyone even knew there was a problem. By the end of the presentation, applause erupted, though not for her alone. For the first time, though, the people who mattered, the ones who had underestimated her, looked at her with genuine recognition. Later that evening, Emily received a message from a trusted ally within the company. They know now. They finally know. She allowed herself a small, private smile. The silent war she had waged for months had reached the tipping point. Outside, New York shimmered in the twilight, streets slick with rain, lights reflecting on puddles like diamonds. Every step she had taken, every insult endured, every moment of dismissal had led to this. She was no longer invisible, no longer underestimated. Those who had laughed when she started from zero now faced the reality that she controlled outcomes, influence, and ultimately their trust. Emily's mind traced back to the people who had doubted her, the colleagues who had mocked her, the mentors who had sneered at her ambition. Every slight, every sneer had been a lesson, every doubt a challenge to overcome. And she had done it quietly, patiently, strategically, until the world could no longer ignore her. That night, walking through streets illuminated by neon and the soft glow of streetlights, Emily reflected on her journey. She had been the girl with nothing, laughed at, underestimated, dismissed. Yet she had quietly built a network of influence and loyalty that made her indispensable. Fate had been patient, and so had she. The storm she carried was no longer contained. Soon, every person who had ever laughed at her would face the undeniable truth. Emily Taylor was no longer just a player. She was the force that controlled the game. Every calculated move, every silent victory, every act of foresight had led to this moment. The city buzzed around her, indifferent to the quiet revolution. Yet she felt the power coursing through her, steady, deliberate, unstoppable. The laughter that once mocked her had faded into silence. The woman who had started from zero was now the one who commanded the future. The morning arrived with an unusual quiet, the kind that makes the city feel like it is holding its breath. Emily entered the office calm poised, carrying the documents that would expose everything. The executives, the colleagues who had mocked her, laughed at her ambition, and dismissed her, were already seated, unaware that the moment of reckoning had come. She placed the folder on the central table, her fingers lingering on its edge, and spoke in a steady, controlled voice. "You've relied on me for months, yet none of you realized whose foresight has kept the company stable. Every solution you praised, every success you celebrated, was built on my work, my decisions, my strategy." A stunned silence fell. Eyes widened, mouths opened, disbelief and shock mirrored across every face. The very people who had laughed at her now understood they had underestimated not just her intelligence, but her patience, her resolve, and her vision. One executive stammered, I thought it was the department's work, not yours." Emily's smile was sharp, calm, victorious. "It was mine," she said. "Every step, every decision, every plan. You were blind to it because you never imagined someone you dismissed could be so capable." She let the words sink in. The room was heavy with tension. Pride wrestled with shame on every face, and those who had once held authority realized it was she who had quietly controlled the outcomes, orchestrated the success, and prevented disaster. Emily continued, detailing examples of how she had anticipated each crisis, resolved conflicts before they surfaced, and subtly guided everyone's decisions while remaining invisible. By the time she finished, the laughter that had once followed her efforts had been replaced by awe, respect, and a reluctant acknowledgement of her power. Outside, New York streets gleamed under the afternoon sun. Rain-soaked asphalt reflecting neon lights, the city indifferent to the human drama unfolding in glass walls above. Emily's mind traced back to every challenge, every insult, every moment she had been laughed at or dismissed. Each one had been a lesson, each one a brick in the foundation of her silent empire. She had started from zero, yet now she held the keys to influence, power, and respect that those who mocked her could never reclaim. And yet she did not gloat. Instead, she felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance restored, of justice delivered without spectacle or vengeance. Fate had been watching, and patience had won. The people who had underestimated her would remember the lesson. Never doubt someone who refuses to remain small. Never mock the determination of someone who builds quietly. And never underestimate the power of patience and foresight. As Emily walked from the boardroom, her footsteps confident, steady, she glanced once more at the faces that had doubted her, now humbled, and whispered to herself, "They laughed when I started from zero. Now they see who controls the fortune." The city hummed, indifferent, unaware that a quiet storm had passed through, leaving only respect, recognition, and the undeniable truth that the girl once laughed at had risen to command everything she had quietly built. Every step she had taken, every calculated move, had led to this moment of ultimate triumph. She had proven not just her worth, but the truth that determination, intelligence, and patience could turn laughter into respect, ridicule into acknowledgement, and zero into an empire.